The stars above the last city have never felt any heavier. As the Edge of Fate expansion looms, Destiny's dedicated guardians find themselves standing at a precipice between triumph and uncertainty. This is not just another seasonal reset or DLC drop. It's a narrative hinge point, a promised finale to a decade-long saga. Emotions run high across fireteams and lore forums alike. Can Destiny truly end, or is this finale simply another beginning that is being cloaked in Endgame aesthetics? The very title, Edge of Fate, evokes a brink between what has been and what's to come. In Destiny's universe, fate has never been a fixed point. It's something Guardians have rewritten endlessly through action, death, and resurrection. And now, players peer over the edge, wondering if the coming chapter will finally answer the questions that have haunted them for years, or if the cycle of light and darkness will twist into yet another loop of destiny. Destiny's mythology has always played with the idea of cyclical time and repeated trials. Guardians awaken from death itself to become immortal heroes, fated to replay battles and grow stronger with each fall. It's a world where every ending births a new beginning by design. As we approach the edge of fate, the central tension is clear. How do you craft a satisfying sense of closure in a universe built on never-ending resurrection and renewal? Standing at this threshold, veterans recall every almost ending before, the momentary victory against Gaul, the revenge at Forsaken's climax, the apocalypse averted in Lightfall, and ask themselves if this time will be any different. Fate, in Destiny's case, has never meant finality. It's an ever-turning wheel. As we step forward, one foot suspended over the unknown abyss, we carry both hope and skepticism. Perhaps, as the saying goes, this is not the end at all, but the place where the story bends back on itself, ready to begin anew. Destiny has always promised grand finales, yet those endings are inevitably haunted by the specter of continuity. Each expansion arrives trumpeting high stakes and closure, only for the status quo to quietly reassert itself once the campaign credits roll. For example, the base game's Red War campaign concluded with a Guardian triumphant and the Traveler awakened, a seemingly decisive victory, right? But almost immediately, everything went back to being exactly the same as it was before, with life in the last city resuming its regular, familiar rhythm, despite the narrative assurances that everything had changed. The tower was rebuilt, Zavala and Ikora returned to their posts, and our wounded home front became business as usual once more. Destiny's story beats resolve, yet the world persists unaltered. Expansions promise conclusion, but the live game's systems insist on perpetuity. This paradox has repeated throughout the saga. Forsaken gave us a revenge tragedy and the shocking death, a climactic end to one chapter, but even that ending birthed new beginnings. Sav rose again as Crow. The Dreaming City fell into a cursed cycle that to this day resets every few weeks, and fresh threats emerged in the aftermath. Shadowkeep and Beyond Light each unveiled revelations that felt apocalyptic, yet they ultimately served as setup for the next season and the next expansion. More recently, Lightfall was marketed as the beginning of the end, dropping us into an apocalypse in progress. Its finale carried an almost operatic desperation. The Witness opening a mysterious gateway, our defeat seeming evident. But even in that end, it was deferred. Instead of finality, Lightfall handed us new mysteries. As one cyclical guardian noted on Bungie's forums, Destiny is a drip-fed game where each release spikes interest for a few weeks before it all flows back into routine loops. In other words, the universe can never linger too long on an ending, because another reset is always around the corner. The result is a narrative resistant to finality. Bungie's storytellers face a unique conundrum. How do you deliver meaningful climaxes in a world that must, by design, persist beyond that climax? The witness may fall, but will the economy, the ritual calendar, the crucible? The ultimate big bad might be defeated in the lore, yet the daily life of Destiny's universe, from the weekly resets to the weekend visits, marches on oblivious to any narrative resolution. One critic even said Bungie can only make things so dramatic before the major characters must resume their role as quest givers and the reward disappears. In an ongoing video game world, after every earth-shattering threat, Guardians still return to the tower. They pick up their bounties and they continue the grind. Past endings have always given way to new cosmologies. Kill Oryx and the Taken linger. End the Red War, a new conflict spark on Mercury and Mars. Avenge Cade, and the dreaming city's curse unfolds. Every ending in Destiny is haunted by the game's need to continue. Bungie might craft a rousing finale in the cutscenes, but once those players regain control, we find ourselves back in a world where nothing ever truly ends. It just loops into the next season. Little wonder, then, that many approach the Edge of Fate with both excitement and skepticism. We've been told many times this is the culmination, the long-awaited resolution to the Light and Darkness saga. Reviews from early players even called the final shape a gratifying end to Destiny's 10-year narrative. Yet, even in praising that finale, fans acknowledge it still, quote, leaves room open for more. Bungie themselves have been upfront that the final shape is the end of the Light and Dark saga. Not the end of Destiny. New sagas and expansions will follow on its heels. The Edge of Fate, in fact, is positioned as a start of a new saga, even as it carries the weight of wrapping up loose threads from the previous one. This means we're in for a finale that must accomplish two conflicting goals. One, give a sense of closure to a story that's run for over a decade, while simultaneously setting up the stage for the future. It's a narrative high-wire act. Destiny's history tells us that whenever one door closes, another is already propped open. Every full stop turns out to be a comma. The fiction of finality in Destiny is just that, fiction. A beautifully told lie that lasts until the next patch. The Edge of Fate will test whether Bungie can play with that paradox in a more satisfying way, or perhaps by acknowledging the cyclical nature of the universe, even as it attempts to deliver an emotional conclusion. If finality is hard to come by in Destiny's plot, it is nigh impossible when it comes to its characters. In this universe, death is just a revolving door. Guardians are resurrected by their ghost companions again and again, making our heroes literally immortal so long as their ghost survives. Narratively and metaphysically, Guardians can't truly die, a fact that the games themselves have interrogated. Gaul sneered at us in Destiny 2's opening act. "You're not brave, you've merely forgotten the fear of death," he says. "Allow me to reacquaint you." It's a cutting observation. What are sacrifice and heroism worth when the protagonist can never suffer a permanent fall? What's impressive about victory when you can never truly be defeated? In the world of Destiny, mortality is a malleable thing. Our victories are preordained by gameplay design. We can always respawn, always return to the fight again. This undermines any pretense that a story's end could mean the final defeat or death for our Guardian. We have literally conquered death thousands of times over in our quest to become legends. The game's lore have even leaned into this tension. Our ghost, that little drone of the Traveler's Light, is the machine behind the magic, the reason we always get back up. Only if a ghost is destroyed can a Guardian truly fail. as was tragically shown with Cade's ghost, Sundance, when they were shot and killed in Forsaken's opening. With Sundance gone, Cade finally faced a mortal end, one of the few permanent character deaths in the entire series. That moment hit players and characters hard precisely because it broke the usual rules of immortality in the series. Yet, Destiny often finds loopholes even around such finality. Consider Saab. He did die at the end of Forsaken, only to be resurrected by a ghost and reborn as Crow, a completely new guardian with no memory of his past sins. In doing so, the narrative essentially retconned a villain into a hero, demonstrating that even death can be a plot device rather than a conclusion. Or take Saint, a legendary titan who was long thought dead in Destiny's lore. Through the intervention of time travel and player actions in Season of Dawn, Saint was pulled back from his fated death and restored to the present day. Going on to mentor new Guardians, Saint literally became a myth within the story, a figure out of time, resurrected by the very Guardians who grew up idolizing him. All of these characters have been forged by repetition and resurrection to the point that they're almost mythical within the narrative. Take Ikora and Zavala, for instance, who have fought through every crisis and always lived to stand as Vanguard mentors afterward. They feel less like flesh and blood people and more like enduring symbols that persist through all calamity. Saint is literally spoken of in irreverent, legendary terms by the NPCs, a walking myth who stepped out of the past. Crow's very identity is a parable of redemption and the blank slate of new life. Even when Destiny does attempt to write the end for a character, the story often finds a way to fold that ending into the ever ongoing tapestry. Characters in Destiny can't die in the way characters in other fictional stories do. If they do, they don't stay dead. They are, in effect, ghosts in the machine, narrative phantoms who linger, return, or transform rather than exit the stage. As we approach the Edge of Fate expansion, this raises some thorny questions. How do you give a satisfying conclusion or a catharsis for characters who defy true endings? The expansion story will almost certainly put key figures in peril. Perhaps the fate of the Vanguard leadership or our own Guardian hangs in the balance, but seasoned players know not to trust that any character's death will stick unless extraordinary measures are in play. The Edge of Fate might try to upend this pattern. Perhaps a beloved character will sacrifice their ghost, making their demise irreversible and emotionally poignant. Perhaps our Guardian will face a moment of true vulnerability. Yet even then, the live service nature of Destiny means any such twist must eventually be reconciled with the ongoing game. Zavala, for instance, cannot simply vanish from the tower without replacement. Cade's death was powerful, but it also left a hole that Bungie is now filling by bringing Cade back in some form within the Traveler's internal world. To recap, Destiny's characters have become legends within the lore, and legends, by definition, never truly die. They either live on through the stories told about them, or they literally return when needed most. The Edge of Fate will have to reckon with this mythic immortality. Perhaps it will lead into it, allowing characters to transcend rather than perish, to join the mysterious Nine, achieving a sort of apotheosis instead of death. Or maybe Bungie will find poetry in an ending where a hero voluntarily lays down immortality, breaking that cycle by choice. In any case, the usual tools of narrative finality, deaths, farewells, irreversible losses, etc., are complicated by Destiny's own premise. We are the dead made living by the light. Our story has always been one of resurrection. As one grim lore quote encapsulated, "You are a dead thing, made by a dead power, in the shape of the dead. All you will ever do is kill." It's haunting because it suggests that our condition is static, unchangeable, and to truly end Destiny's story, Bungie might need to change that condition to let us finally be something other than undying killers in endless war. Whether they dare to do that is part of the drama leading into the Edge of Fate. Can a Guardian's tale ever truly end in peace? Or are we and our favorite characters doomed to fight forever as the perpetual loop of the gameplay sustains us? Destiny isn't just a story, it's a service. Its world is not only written by authors, but also continuously updated, patched, monetized, and sometimes outright removed by its developers. This dual identity, mythology that must also obey the logic of a live service product, creates a constant tension between the sacred and the disposable. On one hand, Bungie has crafted a rich lore universe with deep symbolic resonances. On the other hand, Destiny 2 is a software that gets versioned and pruned. If a traditional myth is like scripture, etched in stone or passed down in text, Destiny's lore is more like a digital manuscript written in disappearing ink. Whole chapters can be deleted with a patch. Time-limited storytelling becomes a hallmark of the game over the past few years. We've seen pivotal narrative content, entire campaigns and seasons come and go, vaulted in the name of keeping the game's size and technology manageable. The result is that some of Destiny's most sacred story moments are, ironically, ephemeral. They live on only in YouTube recordings and fan-transcribed lore entries, not as experiences new players can easily access. For us veterans, this creates a strange sense of cultural memory. The community remembers the Red War as the foundation of the story, the fall of the last city, the moment we lost and regained the light, yet new players today cannot play those missions at all. Bungie acknowledged in court filings that the Red War campaign no longer exists in a playable form, even internally, due to engine changes since it was removed in 2020. In essence, the canonical beginning of Destiny's epic has been erased from the game's present reality. The same goes for Curse of Osiris or the Warmind campaigns, and later even the much lauded Forsaken campaign, all have gone into Destiny's content vault. Bungie's official stance was that this was all truly necessary for the health of the live service, but it underscores a deep truth. Nothing in this world is truly permanent. The mythology is patchable, sure. The sacred can be sacrificed for the pragmatic. As one judge dryly noted when Bungie tried to summarize vaulted story content via a fan-made lore video during a lawsuit, they are, quote, are not going to sit through a 10-hour lore explainer as a substitute for the actual content. The implication is that, even legally, Bungie admitted there's no feasible way to present that old story in game anymore. It exists only in explainer videos and only in the collective memory of the community. This has far-reaching implications on narrative stakes going forward. When players know that even a campaign's event might be removed or retconned later, how do we invest in the permanence of any climax? Over the years, Destiny's world has seen entire planets wink out of existence, storylines cut short or left hanging when seasons expired, and lore entries shuffled away where only archivists at sites like Ishtar Collective keep them accessible. The game's ritual calendar also erodes its permanence. Holidays come and go, seasonal activities vanish on an annual schedule, leaving only lore books as testimony. This ephemeral, phantom-like design heightens the urgency. Players feel pressure to log in and experience a story live before it's gone, but it also undermines the sense of a stable narrative reality. One could argue it's a meta-commentary on Destiny's universe. In a world of cosmic power, entire histories can be rewritten or erased, but more often it's simply the practical reality of a live service game. Yet, within this chaotic impermanence, Bungie strives to deliver meaningful myth. Consider the lengths they go to make each expansion narrative feel grand and consequential. The orchestral scores swell, beloved characters deliver solemn speeches, the marketing speaks of fate and finality. Destiny 2, The Final Shape, was heralded as the end of an era, and indeed its narrative tried to give closure to the light versus dark conflict. And at the same time, Bungie announced a new model to keep the story going immediately afterward. Instead of 4 seasonal drops per year, they're now shifting to a model of 2 expansions and 2 large updates per year in the upcoming Year of Prophecy. In their own reveal, they admit the Edge of Fate sets the stage for our next saga, the Fate Saga, and that this new storyline will, quote, leave you with so many unanswered questions as it begins. In short, even as one myth cycle closes, another is being spun up, and the game structure is attempting to facilitate ongoing continuity. The sacred climax of one story must also, by definition, be the hook for the next content release. Narrative relations become dangling threads intentionally. Lightfall introduced the enigmatic veil without fully explaining it, knowing that curiosity would carry players into the final shape. The final shape, for its part, ends on notes that intentionally push us towards the mysteries of the Edge of Fate. Bungie has to walk a tightrope where each resolution is also a reset. And from a critical standpoint, this raises the question, does Destiny's story truly progress, or does it simply transform to justify the forever game? Some have critiqued the Destiny's inability to create a meaningful sense of peril or consequence has, at times, made its narrative feel like Entourage in space, a power fantasy that avoids ever rocking the boat too much. Every enemy, no matter how intimidating, is ultimately a Potemkin villain we overcome. The world returns to an equilibrium after each victory, with us heroes intact and ready for the next adventure. The removal of content exacerbates this feeling for many players, because even the scars of past battles can be wiped clean. For instance, in the story, the last city has endured Red War invasions, a recent Endless Night, and a coup attempt, and more. But in gameplay, the city has never been an explorable space, and its state never visibly changes. The Traveler's physical damage healed in a live event once, but humanity's social struggles or the Guardian's fame don't reflect intangible game spaces. The myth is largely conveyed through text and cutscenes, while the live service must remain a playground for repetitive action first and foremost. And yet, perhaps this is Destiny's most profound theme, hiding in plain sight, the idea of an eternal return. In real mythology and religion, time is often seen as cycles, seasons, reincarnation, repeating ages of the world. Destiny might simply be embracing that on a meta level. The vaulting of content echoes the cyclical nature of mythic storytelling, where tales are forgotten and rediscovered by new generations. The resets and updates are like ritual renewals, ensuring the world is always in equilibrium that players can jump into. Bungie has effectively built a mythology that is meant to be flexible, even forgetful at times, in service of a live, living game. The sacred must be patchable. The lore must be adjustable. It's a service contract so much as it is a saga. For players invested in the story, this can be a bittersweet thing to hear, because we crave a sense of lasting consequence, to feel our victories and losses mattered in this world. Bungie has tried to offer that feeling through limited time events. For example, the almighty ship was destroyed in Season 11. Players logged in at a very specific time to watch it explode in the sky, a one-time only spectacle. It was a cool moment of living narrative. But, if you missed it, it's gone forever. Yet, now even Cade's death is being somewhat undone with his spiritual return inside the Traveler. Destiny's story thus oscillates between reverence for its own lore and a willingness to hit the reset button when needed. It's no wonder that when approaching the edge of fate, players are asking, will this finale break the mold? Will Bungie allow some true sense of finality? The scars that don't heal, the answers that don't get retconned? Or will it just be another beautiful chapter that nonetheless serves as a prologue for the next content cycle? How do you build a narrative climax in a world designed to never conclude? Perhaps by acknowledging the lack of conclusion as part of the narrative. Bungie could lean into the thematic of a living story, one that can't be pinned down. The characters themselves could comment on how even after the witness is gone, evil will always take another shape, and guardians will always be needed. This has essentially been Zavala's mantra every time a big threat is vanquished. Remain vigilant, because something new will inevitably rise. In a meta sense, Zavala isn't just talking to the character, he's talking to us, the players who will be here next season. In mythic terms, Destiny's saga might be less of a novel and more like an epic poem sung by a community, verses added over time, with some verses forgotten, the song evolving with each retelling. For my part, The Edge of Fate can be seen as the closing verse of one song and the opening of another. And if we can accept that, the crisis of ending becomes less of a crisis and more of a transition point. The key is whether Bungie can provide enough of a payoff in this moment to satisfy our desire for an end, even as we mentally prepare for the story to come. It requires a kind of narrative honesty, admitting that true finality is off the table, but offering an emotional and thematic climax that feels like a resolution of what came before. Parallel to Destiny's never-ending story is its never-ending gameplay loop, and the two are deeply intertwined. Guardians don't just relive the narrative beats, we literally relive activities ad infinitum. Every veteran is intimately familiar with the ritual loops that define Destiny's design. The weekly reset that makes old challenges new again. The knifeball strike you've run dozens of times. The raid boss you can kill each week for loot only to see them reborn the next. This repetitive structure is a cornerstone of the live universe. It delivers that comforting, or sometimes frustrating, feeling of systemic immortality. The sense that the world refreshes itself on a schedule, untouched by whatever you did last week. In universe, one might say the light grants not only Guardians, but the very game world a form of immortality. Activities persist in a cycle, seasons in a rotation. And as we grind, as we reset, and we grind again, the seasons pass, refreshes every few months, with new levels to climb, even as last season's story fades into memory. Our power level gets nudged upward, nullifying yesterday's accomplishments in favor of tomorrow's progression. Destiny's core gameplay loop is always structured as an eternal return, a Mobius strip of quests and rewards that by design have no terminus point. Players often jest that we're rats in the Traveler's maze, chasing the same cheese that keeps getting replaced at the maze's start once more. It's a compelling loop, to be sure, but is it really? The day the final shave launched, millions of Guardians completed the story, and then went right back to running strikes and crucible matches and the new raid just as they had always done. On the surface, Destiny had been fulfilled, but underneath, nothing had changed in our day-to-day routines. Bungie is clearly aware of this tension. In fact, recent communications and updates suggest they are trying to refresh Destiny's systemic loops to keep players engaged in the long run. The Edge of Fate comes with an overhaul of core systems, from a portal activity selector to streamlined build crafting and progression changes. Why would you implement those in what's supposed to be a climactic moment of story? Because the game must remain fun and replayable even after the story beats conclude. Destiny's developers are effectively saying the game of Destiny will live on even as we put this narrative chapter to bed. They've even adjusted the annual model to infuse more frequent big moments and break up stagnation. This, in and of itself, could be seen as an attempt to break free of the duller parts of the loop, to prevent the sense of stasis that can be set in during long content droughts. In other words, they are ritually renewing the game itself so it doesn't succumb to entropy after the saga's end. From a lore perspective, one might see an analogy in how Guardians and their allies break cycles within the story. Think back to the Curse of the Dreaming City, an actual time loop that ensnared that destination in a 3-week cycle. It was brilliant, a meta commentary. Players experienced the same curse cycle every reset, reflecting the lore that the city was stuck in time. That curse was only finally lifted years later in a narrative epilogue that many players missed, but it demonstrated Bungie's willingness to eventually resolve a loop that had gone on for a long time. Could we be seeing something here on a grander scale? Could perhaps the Edge of Fate break a foundational loop in the Destiny universe? Maybe the cycle of light giving power and darkness testing it, the waltz between the traveler and its adversary, is coming to a close, allowing the universe to move into a new paradigm. The Witness's defeat might symbolize the end of the age of light versus dark, theoretically freeing us from the cosmic hamster wheel we've been on. In gameplay terms, of course, we will still have our strikes and our raids, but maybe new kinds of activities will rise to mark a new era. Bungie could lean into the idea of change at a systemic level to mirror change at the narrative level. But still, it's hard to imagine Destiny ever escaping its cyclical nature, because that's just part of its identity. The question then becomes whether the Edge of Fate will acknowledge these ritual loops in a clever way. Will there be a story beat where, say, the Nine comment on the Guardian's endless routines? The theme of Fate itself suggests predestination, repetition until a pattern is fulfilled. Maybe that's the point. We have repeated the seasonal and expansionary cycle so many times in search of the final shape of the story, and now that we've reached the edge of that fate, we can finally break pattern. It's like watching a long-running TV series that finally reaches the moment its opening prophecy foretold. Afterwards, nothing is written, and the future is truly unknown. A key line in the promotional material for this expansion could well be, "This is not just another season." Bungie and the community alike know well that fatigue can set in when everything feels like just another rotation of the wheel. If the Edge of Fate is to avoid being seen as just another season pass with a different coat of paint, it must convince players that something fundamentally different lies on the other side. It has to be a rupture or a mirror rather than a straight line continuation. And by rupture, I mean a break in the cycle, perhaps a dramatic change in the game world or our role within it. By mirror, I mean a self-reflective twist, perhaps a story literally acknowledging the loop. Bungie did something like a mirror in the Final Shapes Endgame, where they had us remember and reclaim old moments. That was both a spectacle and a nod to the idea that this game has always been bigger than one Guardian. It's a shared loop we've all been part of, and it also subtly broke one loop. Never before could more than 6 players fight a PvE mission together. and by letting 12 do so, they momentarily shattered a mechanical limit, which felt mythical in its own right to those who actually experienced it. It said, something different is happening, and the rules are bent at this climax. And for the Edge of Fate, the developers might have similar tricks ready to signal. This is a hinge point, perhaps new mechanics that recontextualize how we play. New mechanics alone aren't narrative, but they feed that feeling that we're entering an unknown space. Ultimately, Destiny's systemic immortality, the endless replay, can either undercut its ending or enhance it entirely, depending on how it's framed. If Bungie continues to ignore it, players might finish the story and be left with the dissonance of still having infinite chores to do, wondering if anything has actually changed. But if Bungie embraces it, the Edge of Fate story could end on a poignant note that speaks to the player's experience. Perhaps a character like Akora or Elsie will say something to acknowledge the countless cycles we've endured and thank us for persisting until this very moment. In the lore, Elsie's story was all about breaking a time loop, trying over and over until one timeline finally succeeds. That's meta if you think about it. All those years of playing through expansions were like infinite parallel timelines, and now we may in fact be the one where the victory sticks. If the Edge of Fate leverages this idea, it can give meaning to the grind. It can suggest that yes, you've done all these strikes 100 times, lived through these loops because you are fated to hone yourself for this final edge. And after it, who knows, maybe the grind will continue, but it will be us stepping into a new loop by choice rather than being caught in the old one by necessity. Long after the servers someday go dark, the myth of Destiny will live on. Not necessarily in code, but in our culture. In fact, it's already happening. Destiny's story has spilled out beyond the confines of the game through its passionate community of lore keepers, theorists, content creators, and everyday storytellers. In this sense, Destiny has created a cultural afterlife much like a real mythology does. It persists in the minds and practices of its followers even when the original texts aren't accessible anymore. Consider that right now, as we stand on the edge of the game's biggest narrative milestone, thousands of players are poring over lore books, rewatching cutscenes, and engaging in fierce speculation on Reddit and Discord. The Destiny community has, in effect, become a custodian of the story, curating, debating, and keeping it alive. A vivid example of this is how players have responded to the vaulting of story content. When Bungie removed the early campaigns, fans rallied to preserve those tales. Websites like the Ishtar Collective literally categorize every lore entry and dialogue line. On YouTube, lore scholars, like my name is Biff, produce multi-hour compendiums retelling Destiny's entire saga for posterity. Biff, affectionately dubbed the community's lore daddy, recently released a nearly 10-hour-long epic video summarizing the story from origins to final shape, and around 12,000 people tuned in live for its premiere. A testament to the hunger for Destiny's mythos outside of the game itself. These efforts are more than just fandom. They're acts of world building in their own right. The community has taken Destiny's transient patchwork narrative and turned it into a codex, a shared legend that can be referenced and passed on. And that's not unlike how oral traditions or religious communities maintain stories, through continual retellings, interpretations, and ritual. Indeed, it can be said, the Destiny community engages in what only can be called ritualistic behavior that reinforces their shared mythology. There are content creators who weekly analyze the latest lore drop as if preaching a sermon, connecting new scriptures to old ones. Streamers and YouTubers host discussions akin to scholarly debates on what the witness's true nature is, or the symbolic meaning of the traveler. Cosplayers dress as Queen Marasav or Eris Morn at conventions, bringing characters to life in our world. Artists create inspired by in-game myths, and every time a player refers to themselves only half-jokingly as Guardian outside the game, or says "Eyes up Guardian" to encourage a friend, they are echoing the lore in real-life context. This is myth-making in motion. The story now lives as much in the community's collective imagination as it does in the official game's narrative. And when we talk about Destiny's cultural footprint, it's impossible not to mention how the community has even altered the course of the story at times. Bungie listens to its audience. Fan theories and fan favorites often influence what threads get picked up. For example, the popularity of characters like Saint 14 played a part in Bungie's devising a way to bring him back into the ongoing story, because his legend grew in the community. Similarly, the fan-dubbed name Lordaddy for Biff humorously underscores that sometimes players turn to community figures for narrative enlightenment more than the game's actual grimoire. Bungie has periodically collaborated with lore YouTubers and acknowledged their contributions, and devs often watch Biff's videos themselves. It's a symbiotic relationship. The developers create the myth seeds, and the community cultivates them into a garden. In the context of an ending, this dynamic becomes especially poignant. If Destiny's current story ends with the Edge of Fate, the community will be the ones to carry that ending forward. They will be the ones to dissect it, to celebrate it, to critique it, and inevitably keep its spirit alive as new content arrives. If there are unanswered questions left, you can bet entire podcasts and video series will be dedicated to theorizing their answers until Bungie provides them. This mirrors how real-world mythologies work after their formative texts are done. Communities continue interpreting and reinterpreting, sometimes splintering into different schools of thought. We already see mini schisms in Destiny lore discussions. For example, debates over the nature of the darkness often had multiple theories, and until canon clarified some in The Witch Queen, you had adherents to different ideas. And even now, with the Witness revealed as a multifaceted villain, there will be debates on what really is and whether it's truly gone. One could argue that Destiny's true narrative legacy will always be determined by its players. The developers can tie off plot threads and declare a saga concluded, but the emotional resonance, what that meant to the players, will echo in YouTube comments, in forum posts, and perhaps future spiritual successors. We've seen players wax nostalgic about the golden age of Destiny and the Destiny 1 days, creating a kind of myth of their own about how the games used to feel. Those sentiments become part of Destiny's meta myth, the story of the game and its community itself. Bungie's recent struggles also feed into this community narrative, sometimes casting Bungie as a trickster figure or a fallible god of this world that the community must hold accountable. Just as the ancient mythologies often involve dialogue between gods and mortals, Destiny's ongoing development is a conversation between creators and fans. For example, after the mixed reception of Lightfall's story, Bungie came out in communications promising to address the confusion and lighten up the narrative in following releases. Almost like priests responding to a dissatisfied congregation, the community's voice shapes the myth as it goes. Looking at the Edge of Fate and beyond, one cannot ignore the likelihood that even if Destiny's game were to one day conclude its support, the fan community might continue to roleplay and write fiction in that universe. There are already fanfiction and fan-made lore compilations. Some players have taken to archiving Destiny in physical form, from lore book collections Bungie has published to personal projects like printing out entire wikis. This is analogous to how real-world religions and mythic texts survive via printing and preservation long after the original text is gone. Destiny might even have a life in other media, because we've heard talk about Bungie exploring films and shows. If that happens, the story will be retold anew for a broader audience, possibly deviating from the game's events, and the myth will transform again. Think of something like the Star Wars expanded universe. At one point, games like the Knights of the Old Republic or novels kept that mythos going between films, and fan communities treated them as canon, or at least near canon. Destiny could follow a similar path in the future, with the community acting as the bridge that carries the lore torch from one medium or generation to the next. It's also instructive to compare Destiny's mythos to actual mythology. Many real-world myths, like the Norse Ragnarok or the Hindu cosmology, portray time as cyclical and worlds ending only to begin again. And more importantly, the stories of those cycles were told and retold by communities, even after the culture that originated them changed or faded away. In a sense, Destiny's Light and Darkness saga might be just one cycle in a potentially longer saga. The community stands at the brink like bards, ready to sing of what transpired in the first cycle as the second begins. And if the Edge of Fate does its job well, it will give us plenty of thematic meat to chew on for years to come. Ideas and lessons that the community can incorporate into an ongoing culture. Perhaps there will be a message about unity or the nature of choice versus destiny that fans latch onto as the moral of this 10-year-long tale. That moral might then color how we approach the next story, just as the Book of Sorrows informed how players interpreted every Hive-related development since. The Chronicle of the Light and Dark saga will inform how we interpret the new conflicts between the Nine, the Witness's remnants, and whatever lies ahead. In summary, Destiny's ending will not really be an ending at all in the cultural sense. It will be a chapter turning in what has become a collaborative myth-making project between Bungie and the community. The afterlife of Destiny, so to speak, the discussions and content that persist outside the game, is where the narrative truly becomes immortal. Bungie supplies the catalyst, but the community ensures the reaction continues indefinitely. When the dust settles after the Edge of Fate, you can expect a deluge of fan content, analysis videos, perhaps community-made epilogues, a celebration of the journey we all took, and of course, speculation about the next saga's mysteries. And in that sense, Destiny's lore has transcended the software that spawned it. Much like a religion outliving its prophet, or a legend outliving the era that inspired it, Destiny's story will live as long as there are guardians who remember the light. The community is now the traveler, carrying the light of the story into the future, regardless of what fate the game itself faces. So here we are, on the brink of Destiny's promised ending, grappling with the paradox that in a world like this, an ending is never absolute. Over the years, we've chased gods and nightmares in an endless cycle, chasing the light, fleeing the darkness, dying and rising again. We become heroes precisely because we endure, because we come back. Yet that endurance is what makes a true final ending so elusive. If there's one thing the Edge of Fate can teach us, perhaps it's this. Sometimes it's to find closure, one must be willing to break the cycle. What might destiny need to forget in order to truly end? Maybe it needs to let go of its own loops, the safety net of a resurrection, the comfort of a familiar grind, the idea that the fight always continues. In a poetic sense, to reach a final conclusion, the Guardian might have to do the unthinkable, set down the gun and step off the hamster wheel of war, if only for a moment. Perhaps the final lesson of the Light and Darkness saga is this. The struggle was never about winning and losing, but understanding. Understanding that the light was a loop, the nurturing, preserving force that kept us and the world going round and round, unable to die and unable to rest, and the darkness was the impetus for change, the unknown that forces an evolution. In coming to the Edge of Fate, we may be asked to step outside the binary entirely. The real unknown is what comes when we move beyond the paradigms that have defined destiny up to now. The Traveler's saga is ending for sure. The new saga begins where the rules might be a bit different, where our fate is not prescripted by the light versus dark, but written in the choices we make beyond those old terms. For the players, this moment is equally a mirror. After 10 years of investment, who do we become once the story we've been following reaches its climax? It's a bit like finishing a long-running novel series or a TV show. There's excitement for the conclusion, sure, but also anxiety about what fills that void after. Bungie, of course, is keen to immediately invite us into a new story, but on a meta-textual level, we as a community will be changed. We'll carry forward the experience of having seen a saga through from start to finish, a rarity in live service games. That shared history becomes part of our gamer identity, our group lore. We've been living inside Destiny's unfolding myth, and as it resolves, we might find that we have been the protagonists all along. Not our player characters, but us, the community, traveled the hero's journey, venturing into a brave new world in 2014, facing trials, expansions good and bad, friendships forged and clanmates lost, hitting lows, and now returning with wisdom and scars to show for it. In the classic myth structure, the hero returns home changed. Perhaps Destiny's home, the tower, our sense of belonging in this universe, will feel changed too, because we have changed. In the end, the edge of Destiny's fate is not about answering every question or tying every loose end. It's about closure in a thematic sense, showing us what this decade-long journey meant. If Destiny has been a story about immortality, maybe the ending will finally show the value of mortality, of things that do end, so that something new can begin. If it's been a story about light and darkness, maybe the ending reveals a spectrum beyond those poles. If it's been about the Guardian as an unyielding champion, maybe we'll see our Guardian make a yield, a sacrifice, or a choice that they wouldn't have made at the story's start, proving and cementing their growth. Whatever lies beyond the edge, we stand ready to face it, because that's what we've always done. The story taught us that meaning was in the pursuit, in the community that rallied around a sci-fi epic and made it something personal and transcendent. So if this chapter is closing, we don't need to mourn it as an end, but we can celebrate it for what it is, a culmination. We'll stand together in the tower one last time under the old constellations, share a dance or a salute, and then step forward into the next sky. Beyond the edge of fate, beyond the loop that defined us, lies a frontier unknown. And that's okay.